feels like whatever line you draw to define American culture, I feel like this isn't meant to be disrespectful, but I feel like you fall very far outside of it. Like I feel like a lot of American culture is defined by kind of by the American ideology and the American form of governance. And I feel like you fall very outside of that. So whatever line we draw to define US culture or whatever, I feel like you would not be included in. 1 2 1 2. Hello, can you hear me? I just got to make sure that you're not saying slurs. Okay. Do you agree that you're not going to say slurs? Okay. Okay, no, okay. Okay, good. Please don't, because it will not be good for stream. Okay, what do you want to talk about?
Before I get started, is it cool if I record this and upload it to my own personal YouTube channel? Just because someone had an aneurysm because I did that earlier, so
feel more than free.
Not awesome. Appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, it says debate with Trumpies. I'm not like a fucking capitalist or something like that, but I definitely do support Trump. I definitely do support him over any person who I guess the left would have to offer in countering him. So I guess I'm a Trumpy in that sense of the word. But
when you say
yeah,
I'm not a capitalist, are you like a National Socialist? Is that the idea?
No. So how do you define a National Socialist? And I'm not trying to get you in a gotcha. Like that's a good faith question. Like when you say National Socialist, what does that mean?
Nationalist and a socialist, like the kind of guy who believes in like a centralized economy, that kind of guy.
Yeah, I definitely support a planned economy. I support an economy that is designed to serve the people. I don't believe in this kind of capitalism. Free markets will solve problems sort of thing. Okay. Which again is kind of like throughout time and throughout history, that's just kind of been like common sense. Okay. It was only around the 17 or 1800s or so when people kind of had this belief that if you let markets just kind of influence things, that's like somehow a good idea. Mm-hmm. That isn't grounded in reality. And
okay.
Yeah, I mean that it's not. You don't have to be a capitalist to be quote unquote right wing or be a Republican or whatever. It's fake news.
Yeah, sure, I agree. Are you like a nationalist?
100%, yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of why I wouldn't call myself a socialist, really. I mean, I guess if you'd consider like someone who wants the economy to work for the people, then I a socialist, then I guess I would be. But yeah, definitely a nationalist, 110%. I think. I'm assuming you live in the U.S. or you're talking about the U.S. at least. But,
yeah.
Yeah. I do think the U.S. should have an identity, and that should be the basis of policy.
So I think the biggest problem that we're going to run into here is that our visions for the country are just going to be 1,000% different. I think that's the biggest problem that we're going to run into here. So I don't even know where to start. Because like when it comes to my, opposition to Donald Trump, it's because he stands against everything that I think America stands for right now. I don't believe he believes in democracy, but I have a feeling that you probably don't either. I mean, maybe you do, but do you? Am I wrong?
Well, hold on. You raise an interesting point. Can you just define, or you can go into as much detail as you want to, but can you just lay out what your axioms are, just so I kind of know where you're coming from?
Depends on what you mean by axioms. Like, are we going like a deep ethical level, or are we just talking about like general values?
All the above. I mean, so my axioms would be like I said, I want the economy to work for the people, and I want our country to have an identity that we base ourselves on and make policy based on. That's roughly speaking, those are my axioms. So kind of what would be your version of what I just said?
I mean, generally, I'm just I'm a utilitarian. I believe in maximalizing happiness for everybody. I think that democracy is the best way to do that. I think I'm a liberal. I believe in capitalism. I believe in pluralism. I think the boiling everything down to racial identity is not great. I'm not saying that you're going to do that, but I have a feeling, just a hunch that a lot of people that have the similar beliefs that you do typically want to draw like the identity of American to be like white. Uh, so like protecting American identity through like super socialist or nationalist aims usually is a way to say we want a white nationalist state. I don't believe in that, but
Okay, that's fair. So I guess you'd say that I mean, it kind of sounds like from just hearing that happiness would be your axiom. The kind of just the most amount of people feeling the most amount of happiness would be kind of
yeah,
what
sure.
you kind of value. Would that be fair?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. But I mean, I don't super
Okay.
engage in like super philosophical conversations often. You know.
Well, no, that's because I wouldn't put it that way, but I honestly have a more or less kind of a similar disposition,
Mm-hmm,
um, which is that manifests itself most prominently in my position on like natalism and on like children and stuff like that.
mm-hmm.
Um, because I would say that, I mean, ethically speaking, I think that every able-bodied person has an obligation to have children for exactly that same reason. That I think it's better to exist than not to exist. It's better to be born than not to be born. So by that same logic, if I want to maximize the amount of happiness that I can personally, create, that would involve me having children, and I think that's applicable on a national scale. Um, so I guess I'm kind of interested what your take on that would be, because if you would
I
agree with
probably
me,
wouldn't
which I'm not
agree.
saying that you do, but if you would agree with me that, um, if you'd agree with me that like being born is a good thing and like having a life to live is a good thing, um, I'm interested to see kind of how that would fit in with
I mean,
your
I think
worldview, I
it
guess.
can be a good thing, but I don't see an imperative to make the most amount of people. I don't necessarily see that. When I'm talking about like the most amount of happiness, I'm just talking about like from a just like a solely I don't know the word for it, but like on an interpersonal level, you know, if you're going to compromise your happiness in order to bring another life into the world, I don't necessarily think there's a moral obligation for you to do that.
But do you have a moral obligation to create the most happiness possible?
To create the most happiness possible, I think you. I don't know. So, in order to create the most happiness possible, um, for society, I'd say yes, but I don't know if that's an ever expanding thing. Like if you were to if it would technically create the most happiness to have 8 kids and to do nothing but, you know, track your menstrual cycles to make sure that you can have the most amount of kids possible, then I don't think that that would be something that I would want.
You you wouldn't want it. Why? I'm kind of confused.
Because I think when I'm talking about like creating the most amount of happiness, I'm more or less talking about like dopamine receptors going off. I don't necessarily know if I'm talking about like an ever expanding sense of like of creating infinite happiness. I don't know if that's necessary. I just want people to be fulfilled in their life.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're talking about dopamine receptors going off, isn't like the more people, the more dopamine receptors that are going off, right?
Uh Probably, yeah. Um but I feel like there's a certain level of compromise for the one person's happiness in exchange for everybody else's happiness that I wouldn't be comfortable with. I don't really have like the philosophical language to express this super clearly, but I'm just basically giving you moral intuitions right now.
No, and I'm not a fucking like debating. Sorry, if can I cuss on here?
Yeah, go for it. Just don't say the N word, don't say the F word, and really try not to say the R word.
The F word being like I can say fuck, right? I can't say like
The
the
F
homophobic one.
A, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's what I thought. Okay, just making sure. So if I'm trying to make this like simple to say and simple to understand, like
Yep.
would four people, like just four random people, right? Um, if four of those people are like 50% happy, right? So each one of them is about as sad as they are happy. So they're just kind of like neutral all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is that better, worse, or equal to, in your opinion, one person being at a 0% and the other three being at 100%? Meaning
Um,
that one person is really, really sad and the other three are really, really happy.
I don't know. Um, it's not like the level of I guess I'm more so just like whenever I'm gauging like a good or bad effect, I more so do it on like a moral intuition scale. I don't know how I feel about like, because this comes down to like when you're measuring utility, do you do it based off of the average, or do it based off of the most amount of people at the highest level that they can be? I had this discussion with I don't know if you know Synth, but I had this conversation with Synth, and I still don't know where I fall on it. um I guess it's just not a question that I super concern myself with, because I feel like moral intuition more or less guides me to the right places. Um, but
I
I
mean,
mean, when it comes to, so like, just out of curiosity, let's say that every 100 people needs to focus on like tracking their menstrual cycle to make sure that they're having the most amount of kids as possible at the most efficient rate as possible, because it technically leads to the most amount of happiness created through the kids that those people create. Do you think that would be like moral
would it be moral to?
to like sacrifice, say, like 100 people to just having like a reproduction factory?
Oh, well, it depends on the scale, right? Like if I have to sacrifice 100 people to, it depends on how many people are being born, right? Like if I have to sacrifice 100 people so that 50 people are born, that doesn't make much sense, right? But if I have to sacrifice 100 people so that like 1,000 people are born, I'd probably say that's worth it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like 100 people to, it would probably be like a, like a 1 to 10 return on children, like a 1 person to 10 children return.
Yeah, that'd be okay. Yeah.
I just don't agree. I feel like I probably value some sort of like freedom of choice a little more than that. Um,
I guess why would that freedom of choice trump, pun not intended, why would that freedom of choice trump the well-being of the 10 times more people that are existing because of that choice, or
because
because of that action that's being made?
I don't know if I'd necessarily say that we need to give moral consideration to people that aren't in existence. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if my moral bar applies to somebody who only has a conception of potentially existing, like a potential 10th kid that I could possibly have. I don't know if I shape my moral understanding around those kind of people more so than the like maximalizing people, like maximalizing happiness for the people that already exist.
Kind of, but then by that same logic, we shouldn't worry about climate change, right? Because we're all going to be dead by the time that, Miami's underwater, right?
um
Like the only people who are going to suffer the consequences of like major US cities, having to deal with like ocean levels rising are people who aren't born yet. So why do we have to worry about it?
I probably wouldn't agree with that, because I would say that like the people who are being born right now are probably going to have like well, first of all, we are already experiencing bad side effects from climate change, but the people who are born right now are also going to grow up to see those kind of effects, and the kids of those kids are also going to grow up to see those kind of effects. So it wouldn't be my job to give moral consideration to the children of those children, but it would be the children's job to give moral consideration to the children of their children, like that kind of thing. Like it would be kind of passed on by generation to generation.
Yeah, but I mean, like that kind of doesn't make sense though, because um you're saying it's passed down from generation to generation, but like the whole thing is like, why? Like I don't have kids right now, but I'm planning on having kids in the future. Why should I make any sort of action to like make the world a better place for like the future generations right now? Um, if everyone that's in question as far as my bloodline or my future generations are concerned, if they're just a thought right now, right? Like if they don't actually exist and they don't have actual like dopamine receptors right now, I guess I'm just kind of trying to figure out like what. um
Yeah. And
yeah,
again, like
yeah.
my philosophical or ethical vocabulary is pretty small, so these kind of conversations are not my typical dwelling point, but I'm trying my best to engage with what I can. Um, so I mean, I guess what the answer would be is that I think it would naturally happen to where the society is built for these future generations if you are building for you and the people around you, and then the people around you build for the people around you, and it would just naturally pass down by generation.
Okay, I think we're kind of getting to a point where we don't really. When you say so you would say generally speaking, your moral intuition is like the thing that guides you in determining whether something's right or wrong. Is that fair?
Generally, yeah.
Okay, so if my and I'm not talking about myself personally. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I could be, I guess, but if my moral intuition is that gay and transgender people are like disgusting, and I don't think it should be legal to identify as that. What
Mm-hmm.
would would you say that that's like a valid point to have?
I wouldn't say personally it's valid, because I feel like that doesn't make the most amount of good for society, and I would say that that's probably like the thing I would appeal to show, um you know, like to kind of demonstrate more my moral intuition. But I think that would probably, like, I don't, it's, if you're asking me, I am mostly guided by my moral intuition, but that's just due to my philosophical understanding being pretty limited. So, I mean, if there is an objective morality, um, I guess that's up for the people to decide. I don't, but like maybe there is a certain thing that is outside of my conception that would be able to arbitrate these kind of disagreements. But as far as I'm concerned, it would probably just be like marketplace of ideas, and appealing to the most amount of happiness for the people alive, or
No,
for
that's
the
fair. I
society around
guess
you.
kind of where I was going with that is that the moral intuition of most people is what I just said. That homosexuality and then like all the alphabet stuff that kind of follows that.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, and I'm not just talking about now, like throughout time, most people's moral intuition was that that's bad and we should avoid it, and shouldn't engage with those kinds of ideas. And that's why, like, again, I'm not coming at this from like a religious angle, but like if
Mm-hmm.
you look at like Islam, you look at Christianity, you look at probably Judaism, I don't know, you look at Hinduism, you look at all of these traditions, not even just religious traditions, cultural traditions, throughout all of like recorded history,
Mm-hmm.
very, 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 very few people have like have like thought of something like homosexuality as like a good thing that they would like kind of just innately agree with. um
I'd have to see. I know that there's like some level of dispute on whether or not certain ancient cultures were okay with homosexuality, but I don't know the validity of that. But what I would say is that I feel like it's probably better for society in general if we allow that. And that's probably where I would leave that. I don't know if like appealing to the moral tradition of cultures past is very effective in changing my understanding that it feels like allowing homosexuals to fuck dudes, or to fuck ladies if they're a dude or a lady, would be beneficial for society, or like cause more happiness.
yeah, I mean, I think where I was going with that is that I do agree in a lot of ways that moral intuition is valid, and that should be like that should be taken into consideration when you're making decisions about things. Which kind of that goes back to my point that like I'm trying to think of a good example. Um, like if you just imagine like a really, really red state like 50 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
like in like Nebraska, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's probably fair to say, again, I don't have a study I could point out. Like you're just gonna have to kind of bear with me.
Yeah, 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 sure.
50 years ago, the most people in Nebraska, if I had to guess, were probably Christians. They probably
Mm-hmm.
took their Christianity relatively seriously, and
Well,
because of that,
we could just make this a hypothetical too. We can just assume all of this is true. Yeah, that's fine.
okay, yeah. So like, if this is Nebraska, if most of the people are just disgusted by homosexuality, they don't really have a good reason for it. They don't like it. Their gut tells them it's bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it follow that in that jurisdiction, homosexuality shouldn't be engaged with because most people just intuitively don't like it?
Um, I would probably. So I don't know if I would believe that all moral intuitions are built equal just due to the. So like, if my moral intuition is that um you should do for society what most makes the most amount of people happy, and then the other person's belief is just like necessarily that this is immoral. Um, I would say like maybe, but the problem is that I don't believe that people engage with like I don't think people engage with morality in the same sense that like or in the sense that like their moral intuition is that this thing in particular is bad. I think their moral intuition would probably just be like a worldview that moral questions fit into, and that that moral system would be what we would have to discuss, I guess. So like if you ask the people in this state, like, well, do you think we should be doing what makes the most amount of people happy in the state? They would all probably say yes. So then you would get down to the like empirics of like, okay, well, why would this make people more happy? And that would be the discussion that I think we would have in that situation.
Yeah, but like, wouldn't you agree that if most people who live in a place don't want something to happen, that like there's going to be more happiness if that thing doesn't happen, right?
I don't know. So I mean, if somebody is like marginally more happy, let's say they gain one happiness point because like this homosexual gets killed, but the homosexual loses like 1,000,000 happiness points, and there are like 1,000 people in the state, then it's still probably more happy to let the gay person live a free life. And also because it sets a better like social contract for the people as well, than it would be to allow them to basically oppress this person.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess just kind of bringing it back to I would say that the reason this was if you're yeah, I don't know, this is probably true for your childhood too, but like
Mm-hmm.
when I was growing up, right? Most of the kids that I grew up with, like you could like by modern by modern standards you can call them like homophobic, right? Like they just kind of two the thought of two boys kissing each other was just like icky, and it just like kind of was gross, and like they
Sure, yeah.
I didn't grow up in a religious environment by any means, but it was just like
Mm-hmm.
that was just kind of like it was just in their gut, right? They didn't really have a reason that they thought that way. It was just kind of like that's just yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that I mean I think this is kind of, in my opinion, this is the difference between the right leaning view and the left leaning view. Is that the right leaning view, by and large, and like there's exceptions to this obviously, but by and large, the right leaning view holds that feeling in your gut is like just because it's subjective and just because it's not empirical, it still is valid, and it still is like something that needs to be respected and taken into account.
Sure, and
And so that's kind of, I mean, at the end of the day, the kind of stereotypical evangelical argument against homosexuality or something, it's not really about like it's not about the Bible, it's not about God, it's not about all this kind of mumbo jumbo that it's made up to be. At the end of the day, it's really just a bunch of people who are just like just in their gut just don't like it, right? Um, which
maybe, but
I would say
I
that
would
that's
I would
that's
probably
valid, yeah.
I would probably argue that it doesn't make for a good society to be oppressing people based off of a gut feeling. Like that probably doesn't make for a good society. If I feel in my heart that gay people are evil and I end up making them second class citizens, then that like the reason that we have like freedom enshrined in the Constitution. I know you don't care about that, but the reason that we do that is to make sure that like these kind of moral intuitions can't compromise somebody's rights, because not even necessarily out of goodwill for the people that are being oppressed, but to make sure that it doesn't happen to any group that society falls out of favor of. And I think that's good. I think having certain inherent protections for certain classes to make sure that you don't end up getting oppressed as well. I think that's some sort of social contract, but maybe not. I think that's good, and I think those are good rules to govern a society by.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I guess I would just kind of yeah, that's valid, honestly. I mean, I think, and again, I would just point to history. I would point to kind of just generally speaking, people, um, this kind of idea that we have to tolerate people who we just fundamentally disagree with, and we fundamentally kind of don't. I don't want to say people, but like ideas, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
I did the kind of when I was bringing up homosexuality, one of the first things you say was like, oh, if we kill a gay person, which like, um, having homosexuality not be a part of society is not
Well, yeah,
synonymous
we
with
can
like
we can just
massacring all the gay
yeah.
people.
If you want to say like make it so homosexuals can't be with like their desired partner, I would make the same argument.
You make the same argument that what?
That like making rules on society based off of who you can sexually engage with probably doesn't make for a good society.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's, and again, I think the other thing that I kind of will come back to in situations like this is social trust. Which is just that essentially the whole idea of social trust is, broadly speaking, the more similar people are to each other, the more they trust each other. Um, and so again, like if I'm in the middle America, I'm in fucking like Indiana or something, um, and I'm a super right wing evangelical dude. And like a gay couple moves in next door, like I
Mm-hmm.
understand there's no really empirical reason why the corn eating guy shouldn't get along with the gay couple.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that like I don't really understand why it's good for like anyone in that situation for society to like expect one of those two people to like almost like feign tolerance just so that they're not ostracized, or they're not economically disadvantaged, or they're not canceled, or whatever happens in that situation.
I mean,
um
realistically, in regards like that, I mean, chances are I probably don't agree with like the performative inclusiveness either a whole ton. I mean, I do agree to a certain extent to where like, and you would probably agree with this. Those two people shouldn't kill each other. Like, I obviously agree. But
yeah,
like, there's a certain like freedom of association where like I don't think you should force that person to move out of the house next to you. Obviously, but like if you don't want to associate with that person, you just shouldn't. Now, like cultural pressure against that is a completely separate kind of conversation because you can't really make rules that dictate how society reacts to something in the free market. Um, but like, or like the free marketplace of ideas or whatever. But like that's also part of freedom is that like if you don't like gay people, you have every right to just not talk to them. Now when it comes to like discriminatory hiring practices or whatever, that then comes in another thing where it's like we probably should have a certain level of protection, like I said, on like for people with certain unmutable characteristics. I think that's fine. But yeah, when it comes to like like I don't think there should be any rule where like somebody needs to make friends with a gay person if they're like uncomfortable with gay people.
well, that kind of is, I mean, that kind of is what's happening though when you're, I mean, you said something about discriminatory hiring practices, that if,
Mm-hmm.
again, like if I own a business, I don't care for gay people, I don't want to hire them. If there's a law enacted that makes it so that I don't have to hire a gay person, right? But like I can't hire or not hire someone based on their
Based on
sexual
their
orientation,
sexuality,
right?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, exactly. If I own a small if I own a small business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like the fourth person I hire
Is a
is
gay
a
guy,
gay
yeah.
person, you're kind of forcing me to be their friend, like, right?
Not really. I mean, like there's different relationships. Like when I say forced to be your friend, I mean it like in a literal like you don't have to like interact with this person in like you don't have to invite them over to your house for dinner and a beer, like that's not something you need to do. The rule preventing discriminatory hiring would probably raise above like the freedom of association because it's an association in a different way. And I don't think that like if we just set the standard that you have the right to refuse business to just anybody that you don't like, then that's probably the collapse of our system.
Yeah, but like,
So like the way that I'm coming at this, like the role of
yeah.
government is like more so like I have like libertarian leaning um ideas in the sense that like we should maximize people's personal freedom unless there's like a societal threatening reason that we shouldn't respect that freedom. So like in an ideal world, I could probably say like, yeah, if you really, really, really don't want to work with a gay guy, I guess don't. But like we don't want to set the standard where business is this thing where um you're like incapable of doing business with people that you don't like. um that's probably not a good unless unless it's for reasons that it's hurting the business or like actively hurting the people. But like a mere discomfort or a mere dislike, I don't think should be bar in order like a bar to where you should be able to basically discriminate against that person.
Yeah, man. I mean, I disagree, but like honestly, you're being incredibly reasonable, so I kind of Like I think we kind of just have an axiomatic difference on that, man.
Probably.
Yeah.
But like, okay, so as it pertains to like, um, are do you consider yourself like a white nationalist, or are you just like a nationalist, like
I'm a
on a
nationalist.
okay,
Um,
but it's not on the
so
grounds of
I'll
like
just
race, right? It's just on the grounds of like a perceived American culture, I assume.
so the yeah, to just outline it really quickly, it's the American in group, which when I'm talking about the American nation, that's what I'm talking about is the American in group. It is incredibly highly correlated to race in the United States, and I'm not going to pretend that it isn't.
Okay.
That being said, it's not a one-to-one correlation. So there's and like I don't really like you people who like just are people in America who just live day to day know this, right? That there's plenty of white people who like generally like rural community. Sorry, there's a car going by.
Yep, you're good.
Um, there's plenty of rural white people who, by and large, don't wouldn't consider black people to be part of their in group, right? Especially if it's black people who talk in like a very you know I guess the word that white liberals
Sure,
invented for this is
yeah, gotcha.
ebonics, which I don't
Yeah.
like using because that sounds just incredibly
Or like the new one is like
patronizing
AAB,
and
but
racist.
yeah,
But
I
like,
know what you're talking about.
yeah, like if it's a black person who like talks, like in a stereotypical way that like a Republican would consider a gay person, excuse me, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
a Republican would consider black people to
Gay
talk,
person.
right?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
if they talk like that, if they dress a certain way, if they act a certain way, if they have certain values, like yeah, it's that what person generally speaking, a lot of white people wouldn't consider them part of the American in group. But it's not because they're black, it's because they're part of like black culture, you know what I mean? Which I understand that might kind of sound like a cop out, but
So I guess
no, I mean
the
I think Americans
go ahead.
I think if Americans are being honest with themselves, they have a pretty good idea of what Americans are, and like at the end of the day, they can kind of, generally speaking, more or less, they can kind of pretty quickly after identifying someone, identify whether or not they're an American. And that's my whole point is that I think that should just be taken seriously, and that being an American doesn't mean you were born here. It doesn't mean that you meet like this, that, or the third characteristic, and it doesn't mean that you're white, right? Obviously, like if a Norwegian person showed up here, they don't speak a
Mm-hmm.
lick of English. Get the fuck out. You know what I mean? Like
Okay,
it's
yeah,
not.
sure. So
So I'm
okay,
not
so
a I'm not a white nationalist in that
at
sense
least
of the
we can
word. So
agree
yeah.
there. So there's two problems that I have with that then. The first is that it feels like whatever line you draw to define American culture, I feel like this isn't meant to be disrespectful, but I feel like you fall very far outside of it. Like I feel like a lot of American culture is defined by um, kind of by the American ideology and the American form of governance. And I feel like you fall very outside of that. So whatever line we draw to define US culture or whatever, I feel like you would not be included in. And then the second problem is that I don't know if we can draw a very hard line when it comes to like who adheres to American culture, because kind of the whole identity of American culture is that we are like this big melting pot of different cultures that all come together and meet in like this big amalgamation of different cultures. So on the grounds that I don't know if there is a defined American culture, and if there was like whatever I could half conceive as, I feel like you would be very far away from.
No, I disagree. So the melting pot thing, I kind of I'm getting tired of explaining this to people, but um the idea of us as a melting pot that's not an idea that's endemic to America. That's people who lived outside of America saw all these people moving in here from all these different places and all these different cultures and called America a melting pot from the outside looking in. So that's not a word that describes like
Well,
that doesn't
but
describe America as it
the
exists now. And
idea, but the
yeah,
idea of like the melting pot is that like we are a very immigrant like welcoming country. That's just like at the heart of what, maybe not so much anymore over the past like couple years, but like America in its totality has been very welcoming of different immigrant populations, assuming that we're not, you know, at war with them.
not not really. So I mean, if you want to take this back historically, right? Most of the immigration into America up until the later part of the 1800s was from incredibly culturally similar places, right? So it was from Ireland, it was from, various places in like the UK and England and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, excuse me, it was from, to a lesser extent, places like Germany, places like the Low Countries, like, the Netherlands and stuff like that. Um, it was kind of those places, but even then, immigration from Germany and from Netherlands and stuff like that, and later on from like Scandinavia and stuff like that, that was very limited, and it was very it was very intentional, right? Like it wasn't like we're just gonna let all these people in because like that's the right thing to do or something. It was like we had like for example like the railroads, right? Like my I'm part Scandinavian, and I think it was like my great great I don't know how many generations back it was, but like they came here to build a specific railroad because it was like we don't have enough people here to build this railroad, and so like we don't really care that you don't know how to speak English. We just care that you can work hard and like
Hmm.
just come here, right? Um, so it wasn't until I mean honestly, it really wasn't until after World War II that like there
Well,
was
I mean
this kind of
that's
question.
kind of a
Yeah.
big thing though. Like they were letting people in with different cultures and different languages because you're here to work hard. I mean, like that feels like a very very American idea.
Kind of. Well, but I mean, even then, though, the thing is that it was expected that those people would assimilate, right? Which the whole point of that is that, even if you came from, say, Sweden or something, right? Obviously in Sweden they speak Swedish, they don't speak English, and but like,
Hmm.
they have a pretty like, I mean, there's differences in between Swedish and say English culture, but like, if you're going to compare, England and Sweden to England and like India, for example, right? Like there's much more similarity
Yeah,
between.
obviously. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
and that
But I
was kind of
mean,
the whole thing is that that's why they didn't import. And I mean, I think you probably know about this, right? That like the same, I think it was the same railroad actually that my ancestors got shipped in to build. There were Chinese people also working on that, and there were all
mhm.
these like there was all sorts of social you know upheaval because people were uncomfortable with Chinese people moving here.
Yeah,
So
sure.
anyway, this is all to say, um, that what your cult like kind of how you act and kind of how your culture is kind of influenced kind of who you are as a person. That's always been incredibly important in in whether or not we can consider you an American, right? um
Maybe, but I mean, like a lot.
yeah.
I would say at that point, then a lot of the people who are coming in here now are forced to assimilate to a certain degree. Maybe not within like cultural norms of like what you eat or like what you value or your religious values or whatever, but like in the sense that we are all working under the same system for the same goal of like a perfect union of like electing our representatives, of having representation. Like we're all working towards like there's a when you come into America, there is a certain understanding that we're assimilating to this very, very, very broad sense of American culture in the sense that like it's a Western culture, I guess. But I feel like if we're saying like we need to be a nationalist on American culture, that's so broadly defined as to what it is. Like I feel like at that point we're probably just policing based off of like adherence to, like I said, like constitutional values or like founding values, which I feel like most people already do. Um,
Well, you even said it is that it's a like we live in a European America's a European country. Like obviously it's not in Europe, but like our culture is European, our language is European, our religious
mhm.
tendencies are European. The way that we solve problems, right? Like our the level of which the level like everything about our society is European, and
Sure,
that's
but I think
because the
this is
people who made this country were European, right?
I think it's kind of
Yeah, go ahead.
relying on the idea that European culture or like Western culture is like a monolith. I don't necessarily think that's true either. And I think the main problem that I think we're going to run into is that any lines on which we police whether or not somebody is a part of American culture is either going to be so narrowly defined that we're not going to have like almost anybody here at all that isn't literally just um Englishman, I guess, or it's going to be so
Yeah.
broad to where we're already here.
I mean, not really, no, because and again, the way I don't want it to sound like I'm like pivoting or something.
Hmm.
The way that I can best explain this is to look at other countries because when, for example, like Japan, right? Japanese people, for better or worse, have a pretty good understanding of what Japanese means, right? Like it's not an ethnicity necessarily. Again, it's incredibly significantly correlated to ethnicity, but not
Hmm.
100%, right?
Yeah.
It's a language thing, it's a culture, it's a way they speak to each other. Like I
Yeah.
said, it's
Sure. Hmm.
largely ethnic, but like that argument doesn't apply to like China, to Japan, to South Korea. It doesn't. I mean, in my opinion, it doesn't really even apply to France or like the UK or like Ireland, right?
I would,
Um,
but if we're trying to make
you could
ourselves,
yeah, go ahead.
if we're trying to make ourselves look like Japan, at that point, we are basically just arguing for an ethno state. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the like happiness measurements in Japan, or like a lot of the economic measurements in Japan, just are not where I want our country to be.
As far as social trust goes, I definitely want us to be in Japan. As far as our rates of crime go, as far as um, people feeling safe around the people who they live around and like not having to lock their doors and shit like that, I definitely want to look like Japan. And like to be, I mean, all of the marginal economic benefits of like letting in a bunch of low skilled third world immigration, as far as like agricultural work and shit like that goes. I could do without that if it means having a homogenous society personally. Which we can go back and forth on the economics of it, and like yeah, I mean like, at the end of the day,
that's
like I
tough
said
for me.
before, the economy should serve the people. The people shouldn't serve the economy, right?
I mean, it should do both. But I mean, like if we have like a, I don't. It's the problem that okay. Okay, I've just got a lot of things circling through my head, and I want to make sure that I can vocalize them the way that I want to. Um, so it looks like Japan has like a very very low quality of life satisfaction. Like they're very unsatisfied with their quality of life. Um, it's like, and the global impression of Japan is that they are just not a very happy country. Um, I don't know if that's the kind of like country that I want to strive for. You know, like cultural exchange, I think is a very listen. My artist comes out. All right, I'm an art major. It just
No,
feels
you're
like a
fine.
very
Yeah.
beautiful thing, like cultural exchange in the way that America does it. And I like this idea of like a very like unified, sterile, kind of unhappy culture. But at least everyone around you looks. Sorry. At least everybody around you like shares the same cultural values. I just feel like that A is very outside of the understanding of what it means to be an American, and B, I feel like is just not a very good end goal to strive for, because it doesn't even seem like Japan is happy with it. It doesn't seem like the Japanese people are happy with it.
Well, no, because I mean, I could point to Japan again. Like as far as logic would have it, right? Japan would have the same economic or social or whatever benefits from massive amounts of immigration, theoretically that we would, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not doing it. China isn't doing it either. South Korea isn't doing it either. Mongolia isn't doing it either, right? Like, um, but
Sure, but
like
that's because
more
of
to that
the.
point. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's because of the very very strict understanding of their Asian culture. Like Asians are very very or they seem very very like ethnically focused.
Yeah.
But I would argue that preventing them from making their people more happy or making their economy more robust is a downside of that understanding of ethnicity, or that understanding of culture.
And I guess, is there a country besides the U.S. where the argument that you're making holds up? Where like
I don't
the kind
know,
of
but I also don't think
it
like,
doesn't exist. That's why you don't know.
well well, that's fine, but I mean, there's a reason why they call the U.S. like a grand experiment. Is like we are a very, very unique country, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. And if it's working for the U.S., and it's not working for the example countries that you listed, like Japan, I would probably prefer to keep our system pretty similar to the way it is right now, instead of like a ethnically homogenous society where we have no cultural exchange, where our people are like super unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, bro, the I guess kind of cultural homogeneity, I guess you could say, is on a spectrum, right? So on the one end, you have Japan, right? You have South Korea, you have North Korea, you have all the places I was just talking about, right? And then on the other end of it, you don't have us. The other end of it, you have Brazil, right? You have Brazil, you have India, you have um I guess Nigeria to a lesser extent, right? Incredibly diverse, which Nigeria is incredibly diverse. The people are all black, but that doesn't mean they're not diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, incredibly these are incredibly diverse places, and like because they're incredibly diverse, they're incredibly bad at getting shit done because you have all these vastly different people with all these vastly different ideas about what's right and what's wrong. We're constantly fighting with each other over it, right? which because of that, crime goes up. People don't trust each other. People don't do things in their community. In India, right, you have like unimaginably stratified, social things because you have like I think it's like 25 or like 30% of the country is Muslim and the rest of them are Hindu, and like they'll just every now and again they'll just start fighting each other, right? Because they just
Right.
don't get along.
I
And
mean,
like that again, you see this in Brazil, you see it in India, you see it
yeah.
in every place where like multiculturalism is attempted to work. It does not work. And the thing about America is that the multiculturalism of the 1800s, where you had like Irish people and Italians and like a few Russians here and there and stuff like that, that does not compare to like what's happening right now, like at all.
I
Um,
listen. I gotta go, and maybe we could set up another conversation that can go a little more in depth in the future. But to that, I would say, I mean, like, I think the problem is I don't know if we can really draw the failure of Brazil or the failure of India to their multicultural exchanges as much as like India. I feel like their biggest problem is probably just overpopulation. It's not necessarily the makeup of those populations. It's just that there's way too many fucking people. Or like Brazil's problem is probably just that they're like not as wealthy of a country, so they can't like meaningfully meet the needs of their people. Like it's not necessarily. I would need to see something to show that the failures from India and the failures from Brazil are more because of their diversity and less because of like their economic standing or or like any other mitigating factors. But I mean, I'll let you have the last word, and then I gotta go.
no, yeah, I mean, like I said, we have more differences than we've hashed out, but
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you being reasonable. I appreciate you taking the time, and I'll hit you with the subscription right now. I'll leave a comment, and I might be back because we disagree, but you're pleasant enough to talk to, so appreciate the conversation, bro.
I try, buddy. Thank you. Okay. Wasn't expecting a white nationalist debate, or no, no, not white nationalist. I'm sorry. I don't know. It's tough to kind of parse through because not white nationalist, but I want to be more like Japan. It feels like.